There's a specific kind of person who remembers rushing home to catch their favorite TV show, knowing that if they missed it, it was just gone. No rewind, no streaming, no second chance. That same person also remembers the exact week they made their first Spotify playlist. Not someone who only knows streaming, not someone who never touched a cassette tape, someone who lived through both, back to back, right in the middle of figuring out who they were. If that's you, psychologists spent decades not knowing what to do with you. But it turns out that confusion is the most revealing thing about you. In 2014, sociologist Sarah Stancorb gave this group a name for the first time: Xennials, a microgeneration born between 1977 and 1985, sitting in the gap between Gen X and Millennials. Some researchers also call them the Oregon Trail generation, always navigating uncertain terrain with limited supplies, figuring out the next move as they went. It's more accurate than it sounds. Today, we're going to get into exactly why. Why Xennials are wired differently. Why the timing of their childhood created something genuinely rare. And why the thing that always made them feel like they didn't quite belong anywhere turns out to be the most valuable thing about them. Let's get into it. Picture this. It's 1988. You're 11 years old. You want to make plans with your best friend for Saturday. So you call their house. Their mom picks up. You use your most polite voice, state your business, and wait. If your friend isn't home, that's it. No voicemail, no backup plan. You just try again later. Saturday comes. You show up at the agreed corner at the agreed time and you hope they remembered. And they usually did. Because when there's no way to cancel last second, you don't cancel. That was the world Xennials grew up in. Analog rules, real commitment, and absolutely zero documentation. That fight at a party, that embarrassing phase at 14, that relationship that ended badly. None of it was archived. None of it was screenshotted. It lived in a few people's memories and slowly dissolved, the way human memory was always designed to work. Psychologist Elizabeth Loftus spent decades researching memory and found something remarkable. Memory isn't storage, it's reconstruction. Every time you recall a moment, your brain reassembles it slightly differently, filtered through who you are now. Therefore, Xennials got to let their past evolve naturally. Their stories belonged to them. They weren't trapped by documentation, and that shaped their relationship with identity in ways that are becoming increasingly rare. But, and this is what makes the Xennial experience genuinely unique, that analog world didn't fade gradually. It didn't slowly transition. It didn't give anyone time to prepare. It just ended. Pew Research found that in 1995, just 14% of American adults had internet access. By 2005, 68%. An entire civilizational shift compressed into a single decade, landing directly in the middle of Xennial adulthood. One day you were passing handwritten notes in class. A few years later you were on Friendster, then MySpace, then Facebook. Then suddenly you had 17 different ways to contact someone and couldn't remember what it felt like to just not be reachable. And here's what makes this neurologically significant. The prefrontal cortex, the region most responsible for adaptability and integrating new information, doesn't fully mature until your late 20s. Research by Jay Geed at the National Institutes of Health established this, and it's been consistently replicated. What that means practically? Xennials hit this seismic technological rupture while their brains were still being built. Plastic enough to absorb entirely new systems. Old enough to remember, in their bodies, in their habits, exactly what came before. Therefore, they didn't just adapt to the digital world, they became fluent in both. There's a concept in psychology called bicultural identity. Originally developed to describe people navigating two genuinely different cultures, immigrants, children raised across multiple countries. A large-scale review of 83 studies found something that surprised researchers. People who had to navigate two genuinely different worlds didn't end up confused. They ended up more mentally flexible than people who only ever lived inside one. Now apply that to time periods instead of cultures. Because the world before the internet and the world after it didn't just look different. They ran on completely different logic. Different expectations around attention, privacy, relationships, and what it even means to be present with another person. Xennials speak both languages. You can sit in a waiting room without reaching for your phone, but you can also learn new software without needing a tutorial. You remember when canceling plans last minute was genuinely a big deal. Therefore, you carry a different baseline for reliability than people who grew up with the cancel anytime culture of smartphones. That dual fluency isn't nostalgia. It isn't being stuck in the past. It is a cognitive advantage that no amount of training can replicate because it had to be lived, not learned. But here's the layer that gets consistently overlooked. Because Xennials didn't just navigate a technological revolution during their formative years, many of them walked directly into economic collapse, right when they were supposed to be building momentum. Economist Lisa Kahn's research on recession graduates found something sobering. Entering the workforce during a major economic downturn can suppress earnings trajectories for a decade or more. Not temporarily, structurally. Xennials who graduated in the late 90s walked into the dot-com collapse. Those in the early 2000s hit the post-9/11 recession. And just as the oldest Xennials were finally finding their footing, therefore 2008 arrived and took the floor out again. That kind of repeated economic disruption doesn't just affect your bank account. It becomes a permanent internal weather system, a low hum of contingency planning that never fully turns off. Even after the job is stable, even after the rent is covered, some part of you keeps one eye on the exit, just in case. But, and this is the reframe, that's not anxiety without purpose. That's pattern recognition. That's why Xennials are more likely to have backup plans, emergency funds, and multiple income streams that their more optimistic peers never thought to build. They didn't become cautious because they were fearful. They became cautious because they were paying attention. So here's what all of it adds up to. For most of your life, not fitting neatly into a generational box felt like a minor inconvenience, an identity gap, something to shrug off when the conversation moved on. But that was never the real story. The real story is that the specific window you were born into put you through something no other generation experienced in quite the same way. You had an analog childhood that built patience, commitment, and a kind of trust that only exists when there's no other option. Then the entire world restructured itself digitally, right while your brain was still open enough to absorb it fully. Therefore, you became fluent in both worlds in a way that simply cannot be manufactured. You got economically tested repeatedly, at exactly the moments when it hurt most. But that testing built a resilience that quietly sets you apart from every generation around you. And through all of it, you learned to hold contradictions, to be both things at once, to live in the space between what was and what is, without needing it to resolve neatly. Most people alive right now either don't remember the before or can't fully imagine the after. Xennials remember both, in their habits, in their instincts, in the way they still leave longer voicemails than anyone wants to receive. You were never lost between two generations. You were always exactly where history needed you to be. If any part of this felt like someone finally put words to something you've carried for a long time, drop it in the comments. I'd genuinely love to hear your story. And if you want to keep exploring the psychology of the generations that shaped the modern world, the next video is right here. I'll see you in the next one.